Well, thank you very much to the Chamber for inviting me. Recognition of Ambassador Seixas, João Carlos Ferraz, and maybe recognize them also because they gave me some ideas about, I think, what we want to accomplish, or ideas that we think about throughout this presentation, for example, or in general about this, that the dream is becoming a reality. It's not easy, it's not nirvana, but it is happening. We have to think in the long term. I talk with investors all the time. They got about a 6-month horizon. Sometimes it takes you 10 years. We'll see how that works out. And this is an evolution and a process. And maybe finally that what we're really doing is working with society, developing skills. In the case of Brazil, but I think in the case of Petrobras, but I think it applies to all. We must also use oil to, in a sense, progress the society, involve the society in our actions, but we must do it on a competitive basis, and so I hope to present all that to you in the next 15 minutes. But also, speaking with David Neilman, is what I realized, in a sense, again, oil and gas is not necessarily infrastructure, but how do we tie this into infrastructure? And I realized to some extent the model I want to talk about, shipyards in Brazil, is very analogous to Azul, where he has his equipment, airplanes purchased from Embraer. He has terminals which he needs to operate his airplanes and his flights. What we need is drilling rigs and platforms and tankers to drill, process, and transport our crude oil. And we also need a home base, which happens to be the shipyards which build it. A final comparison analogy, though, is that if Embraer can't competitively deliver airplanes, he's going to buy them from somebody else, but he gets support from BNDES, and ultimately then this whole Brazilian operation becomes competitive. So with that introduction, let me begin. And first thing, always important to put scale into Petrobras. I have the, let's say, the privilege, if you will, of always being able to multiply by a factor of a few zeros what anybody else can do. And as you'll see, we have a total spend over the next 5 years of over $200 billion, of which about $118 billion is just in E&P. And a portion of that, what we'll see, is directly related to shipyards. Here you see production of $89 billion, exploration of $25 billion, and then transportation of $2.9 billion. So let's see a little bit how that works together. And what we did, and by the way, I took this presentation, it comes from our business plan, and then also President Graça gave a talk in front of the Rio Oil and Gas last week, and I thought there were many interesting slides. And what I think she's done is help us to visualize on a long-term basis what's really happening in Brazil and shipyards. It's also a little bit her way, I think, of being able to conceptualize in her own mind and follow each of these projects, and I think you'll see more of that in a minute. But these are the production units. And what would you say about the production units? First, each one costs about $1.5 billion, okay? Local content, now, we've actually built about 5 of these starting back in 2002. We can now build them in Brazil with about 70 to 75% local content. The FPSO itself, the production unit, represents about the third of the cost of one of these big developments. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And what we also see, if you look from the period from 2012 to 2014, it can be kind of divided down. The Ps are units that are built to order, owned by Petrobras, 180,000 barrels a day. The last units that are being used or developed to develop the Campos Basin. And then these other ones, the name, Cidade Isla Bela, Cidade São Paulo, these are the first of the pre-salt units going in, and we'll see more about that in a minute. And then going in 2016 and beyond, the P66, 67, these are what we call the replicant units, and we'll see more about how we're building these. We're creating an assembly line of these FPSOs in Brazil. Then the P72, 77, these are to develop the transfer of rights. So there's kind of a broad scope of what we're doing. So 38 units in total. Again, each one $1.5 billion. The later ones were about 2/3 interest, so it's not all ours, and the leased units are somebody else's capital. Talking about drilling rigs, what you would say there, we began this process back in 2008. It literally took us about 4 to 5 years to create a structure where we think we can build in Brazil rigs on a competitive basis, and where the risk that we take is similar to the risk that we take when we were ordering them on an international basis. We would say, it's taken us a while, and what you would say also is that during the time when we first announced the building of these rigs in Brazil back in '08, since then we've increased our fleet with internationally built rigs from 5 to 40 today. And so what I think that reflects then is a pragmatism and a realism. We couldn't do it today. We had to structure it. In the long term, we expect these rigs to be built in Brazil. But in the meanwhile, as we develop this new pre-salt frontier, we're using rigs that are imported, and over time, they will be replaced by these rigs to be built in Brazil. Each one of these, by the way, costs about $800 million. We are not the owner of them. This will be somebody else that's building and providing the capital. Finally, crude oil and product carriers. This is now taking out. I had a Greek ship owner once said that tankers are really just big bathtubs with a lot of tubes. Anyway, it's less complex, $50 to $100 million each of these. We're getting really gearing up on these things. We needed to replace our fleet and to transport that increase in production, which we expect to be going from 2 million today to over 4 million by the 2020. Now let's turn to, and what I've done then is to give you a sense of each of these shipyards and where it is and what it's doing and how this process is evolving over time. And I begin with the most experienced shipyard, Brasfels. I actually visited there last summer, and one of the things that most struck me is that this has been working now for 12 years. Okay, there's a learning curve that you just have to get through. It's owned 100% by Keppels. There have been many lessons learned. If you'll see there, they're building these, we'll see in a minute some of the units they're building, the Cidade, Sao Paulo, Paraty. These are going into the pre-salt, the P61, the last of the production units. We also see at the far end of the curve these names, Portugal, Barcui. Those are the drilling rigs that they expect to be delivering by 2017 through 2019. Also, they're doing some of the integration. What we'll see overall, there is this great combination among shipyards, both in Brazil and internationally. Over time, things will migrate more towards Brazil as it develops the capacity. So it's a process that will last. It has been going on since 2002 and will last really through this decade. Here comes the best part, all the pictures. President Graça had, I think what she does now is track these by physical progress. This is her single. I think what she's most focused on is production in Brazil and executing each of these projects. If you look very quickly, again, I was there last summer. This number 1 is the hull for the P61. That was 3 months ago, was in a dry dock. It's now floating. It's waiting for the deck box and the modules coming from Singapore. P62 is the Sapinhoá pilot. That's going out in January. That was tied up elsewhere and is now completing and soon to be going out to sea to be the second of the pre-salt big projects. And 3, there's a conversion. I think actually the conversion happened in China, and now they're going to integrate these top sides, the top part of VLCC. Turning now to Atlântico Sul, what you'd say about this is the star-crossed shipyard if you follow Brazilian press. First of all, the João, they did primarily these tankers. The João Candido, I don't know how many front page articles about this being a year and a half late, costing twice as much. The P50 on the drill ships, the P55, again, big announcements, a year and a half late, some welding issues. So there's a learning curve going on. And then even the drill ships, the first 7 of the drill ships ordered a year and a half ago, they're still in a very early stage and been headlines about all of that. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if somehow the TCU is checking into this, okay? But the beauty, that's the negative part of the story, if you will. The beauty is it's a beautiful shipyard, okay? This, as you'll see in P62, again, one of the last of the great hulls going, the 180,000 barrel a day systems going into Brazil. The hull has been converted there. They're now going to be building the topsides. We'll see that. You've got in the far top, number 4, that is actually where these new drill ships that they will be building going. As you can see, they've still got a long way to go. But the fact is, it's really the largest, most modern shipyard in America. They have had learning curve issues. Also, I forgot to mention, each of these shipyards employs about 7,000 to 8,000 people. And again, bringing the workers up to speed and making this an efficient yard, it's not an easy process, as we said at the very beginning. What I did also, there's a couple of minor shipyards, including these aren't really shipyards, but they are, and you don't need a shipyard to do the processing unit. So what I've given you is a couple examples where they're building these topsides, and then they will integrate them with that hull that we saw in the prior page. So we've got a series of these throughout Brazil. Here's another case. They're using the Nuclep, the facility where they have built the nuclear, the Angara 1 and 2, where they're constructing a series of these modules, which they will then incorporate into those hulls that we saw earlier in the shipyards. And so this process is continual. And again, if you were to go each and every unit, you would see that the hulls are being, some are still being converted in China and Singapore, others happening in Brazil, the modules in some cases abroad being then transported and mated with hulls here in Brazil. Turning now to Rio Grande, this is the third of the big yards that is actually already is really, and again, it started 6-7 years ago. It is now becoming functional. We'll see in a minute P55, the hull, as I said, was Atlântico Sul, but now the integration there. And all these Ps, 66, 67, these are the assembly line, the replicant hulls we call, which will be the main processing units in the pre-salt beginning in 2016 and 18. And here what we see, again, this interesting number 6, the P55, the hull, the semi-sub was built in Atlântico Sul. It was transported here in the south of Brazil. And now they did the deck mating. I'm going to show you a picture of that in a second. And you'll see on the some of the lower part is they're cutting steel for all of those hulls that once the P55 leaves that dock, they will be integrating that. And as you'll see, they're also building the biggest crane in the world to be able to lift all of this equipment. Here I did, again, this is P55 and a close-up of that other. What's interesting about this top side, the deck weighs 17,000 tons. It's the heaviest piece of equipment ever lifted by man, 47 meters. Shows you what, over time, one can be done in Brazil as these shipyards mature. Here, there's Rio Grande 1 and then Rio Grande 2. Rio Grande 2, what they're going to do, you'll see they're building some of the drill ships that I mentioned earlier. It's still in very early phases. 7 years ago, this was just empty lots. What I did here, again, speaking of empty lots, this is what they've done is the topsides, the processing units, they have spread those throughout a number of EPC contractors that are a combination of Brazilian and foreign builders. And what you see, and again, the interesting thing about this is, where is this right now? These are going to be building these topsides that I showed you early that are really going to be in 16 through 18. Again, to put this in scale, you see those little trucks there. These are semis, so it's a big area, but they're just really starting, and this is part of that building of that process. Now, this is OSX. Again, they've been at it. 3 years ago, this was probably a nice beach, I guess. And, but they have, as you see, you've done the drainage. We have with them really a couple of these integration topside, actually what is the topside construction is still early on. Here there's been discussion about them building drill ships. There will also be, OSX will be building production systems for their own OGX. But as you see, they've been at this about 3 years since the IPO, but it all does take time. Now as we go, as you see, we've gone from the most advanced, where you've got 2 FPSOs being constructed, a semi-hull, a semi-sub constructed, and with the integration going to begin. Here what we have is Jurong. I think it's the largest shipbuilder in the world, if not, or one of the top 3 or 4. It is based in Singapore. They are going to be converting this land into drill ships and building that out. Already, as you'll see, they do have, interestingly, some of their drill ships are already being constructed in Singapore. There does have to be a local content requirement of these of between 55 and 65%. But again, to accelerate the process and keep it going as they commit to developing this land, they're already beginning to build in Singapore. You also see they have a couple of the top sides for the P-68, 71, the big replicants. So all this process and this integration and this splitting of work across a broad range within Brazil is what's happening now. And in the next 3 to 5 to really 10 years, what we're going to have is a very sophisticated, developed, advanced ship and business in Brazil. Here we go, and what I should have also mentioned is this Enseada is another big one that also has a number of drill ships. I should also mention that each of these shipyards has typically a Brazilian contractor and then a foreign technical partner. In this case, it is Kawasaki. In the case of Atlântico Sul, they did have Samsung, but didn't have Ishigama. And so the case of OSX had Hyundai. So in each and every case, Petrobras has insisted that there be a technical partner with real experience that can help them through this process. With that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.